Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop chasing something, it suddenly seems to come looking for you? Strange, isn't it? Maybe you've experienced it yourself. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, you stop trying so hard to impress someone, or you simply redirect your attention toward your own life, and somehow people begin to notice you differently. The question is, why does that happen? Most people assume it's because you've discovered some secret trick or psychological hack, but the truth is much more interesting than that. Human behavior is deeply influenced by attention, expectation, and perceived value. Sometimes the biggest change doesn't happen because you said something brilliant. It happens because you stopped constantly asking for validation. This is where the psychology of scarcity becomes fascinating. Scarcity isn't just about money or rare objects. It also applies to time, attention, emotional availability, and even your presence. The less unlimited something feels, the more carefully people tend to evaluate it. That's not manipulation. It's a pattern that psychologists have observed across many areas of human decision-making. But here's where many people get it completely wrong. They think withdrawing attention means playing games, ignoring people on purpose, or pretending not to care. That's not what we're talking about today. In fact, forced distance often backfires because people can usually sense when a behavior isn't genuine. Instead, this video is about understanding what naturally happens when you stop making another person the center of your emotional world. What changes inside you? What changes in the way other people respond? And why does genuine independence often create stronger impressions than constant effort? By the end of this video, you'll understand why attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess, why giving it away carelessly changes how people perceive you, and why learning when to redirect it isn't about controlling others. It's about changing the way you show up in every relationship. Once you understand this psychological principle, you'll start noticing it everywhere. 1. Stop chasing, start changing. Imagine that starting today, every time you reached for your phone to check whether someone had replied, the screen stayed completely blank. No new messages, no notifications, nothing. At first you would probably feel uncomfortable, then you might start wondering why. Eventually, your mind would begin creating explanations. That's what the human brain does when something expected suddenly disappears. It searches for meaning, and that simple psychological process is at the heart of why withdrawing your attention can change the way people respond to you. Most people believe that attention is valuable because it makes others feel important. While that's true, there's another side that often goes unnoticed. The way you distribute your attention also tells people what you value. If you constantly direct your time, energy, and focus toward one person, regardless of how they respond, you're silently communicating that your attention is unlimited. And when something appears unlimited, the brain naturally assigns it less significance. This isn't because people are cruel or ungrateful, it's because familiarity changes perception more than most of us realize. Now, this doesn't mean you should suddenly become distant or ignore people to provoke a reaction. That's where many misunderstand the psychology of scarcity. Artificial distance usually feels artificial. People are surprisingly good at sensing when someone is acting differently just to get attention. Instead, the real shift happens when your focus genuinely returns to your own priorities. You become occupied with your work, your goals, your health, your friendships, and your personal growth. The attention you once gave automatically is now being invested in building your own life. Here's what becomes interesting. As your behavior changes, other people lose the certainty they once had about your availability. Human beings are naturally curious when predictable patterns suddenly change. If someone always texts first and then stops because they're genuinely busy living a fuller life, that change often stands out. Not because silence is magical, but because contrast captures attention. The brain notices differences far more than routines. The lesson isn't to become unavailable. It's to become genuinely engaged with a life that doesn't revolve around someone else's responses. Ironically, the less your happiness depends on constant attention from others, the more confidence you naturally project. And confidence rooted in purpose, not performance, is one of the rarest forms of scarcity people encounter today. That's the kind of change others notice, even when you never announce it. 2. Attention creates value. What if I told you that the more freely you give something away, the less people often notice its worth? That sounds unfair, but it's a pattern that appears everywhere in human behavior. Think about it. Fresh air is essential for survival, yet you rarely think about it because it's always there. The moment something becomes limited, however, your awareness of its importance immediately rises. Your attention works in a surprisingly similar way. Most people believe attention is simply a way of showing interest. In reality, attention is one of the strongest signals of value you can send. Every conversation you prioritize, every favor you agree to, every moment you spend thinking about someone is an investment. Whether you realize it or not, you're telling yourself and the other person what deserves your time. The problem begins when you invest all of that attention into one place while asking for very little in return. Over time, what was once appreciated can quietly become expected, and what becomes expected often loses the sense of value it once carried. This isn't about blaming other people. It's about understanding how the human mind adapts. Psychologists call this adaptation. We naturally become accustomed to things that remain constant. A compliment means more when it's sincere and occasional than when it's repeated every hour. The same is true for your presence. If someone knows you'll always be available no matter how they behave, your availability slowly fades into the background. Not because you matter less, but because certainty reduces curiosity. Now imagine the opposite. Instead of making another person the center of your schedule, you begin filling your time with meaningful pursuits. You learn new skills, spend time with people who energize you, focus on your health, or build something you're proud of. Without forcing distance or playing games, your attention naturally becomes more selective. Suddenly, every moment you choose to spend with someone carries more intention because it comes from choice rather than habit. That's the difference most people never notice. Scarcity isn't created by pretending to be busy. It's created by actually having a meaningful life that deserves your attention first. When your focus has purpose, your attention becomes valuable because it reflects priorities instead of need. And people tend to recognize that difference without you ever having to explain it. The less you seek validation through constant availability, the more your presence begins to feel intentional. And intentional attention is almost always valued more than attention given without limits. 3. The power of uncertainty. Have you ever noticed that the stories you can't finish are the ones you remember the longest? A movie with an unexpected ending, a conversation that ends with an unanswered question, or a person whose next move you can't quite predict often stays in your mind far longer than something completely obvious. The human brain is uncomfortable with certainty's opposite. It wants to fill in missing pieces, solve unfinished puzzles, and understand what it cannot immediately explain. That's why uncertainty is one of the most powerful forces shaping human attention. Most people accidentally remove all uncertainty from the way they interact with others. They always reply the same way, they always make themselves available, and they always reveal exactly what they're thinking before anyone has to wonder. While honesty is important, complete predictability often leaves very little room for curiosity. When people already know exactly what tomorrow will look like, their minds stop paying close attention because there is nothing new to discover. This doesn't mean you should become mysterious for the sake of appearing interesting. Forced mystery usually looks exactly like what it is, an act. Real uncertainty comes from having a life that isn't built around managing someone else's expectations. Sometimes you're available because you genuinely want to be. Other times you're focused on your own responsibilities, your personal goals, or simply enjoying your own company. Your behavior isn't changing to create suspense. It's changing because your priorities are real, and your life continues moving whether someone is watching or not. Think about the people who naturally capture attention. They rarely spend their time explaining every decision they make or announcing every move before they make it. They allow their actions to speak first. That creates a healthy level of uncertainty not because they're hiding something, but because they aren't constantly seeking approval. Their confidence comes from knowing they don't need to narrate every chapter of their lives for others to remain interested. The irony is that many people chase attention by becoming easier to read, when the opposite often happens. When every thought, every feeling, and every plan is immediately placed on display, there's very little left for the imagination to explore. But when you become fully engaged with your own life, you naturally leave space for curiosity. People begin to wonder what you're building, what you're thinking, and what keeps you so focused. You didn't create that curiosity by playing games. You created it by becoming a person whose life continues unfolding, whether anyone is paying attention or not. That's the kind of uncertainty that attracts genuine interest, because it grows from authenticity instead of performance. 4. When silence speaks. What if the strongest statement you could make was saying nothing at all? That sounds backwards in a world that constantly tells you to explain yourself, defend yourself, and make sure everyone understands your intentions. Yet some of the most powerful moments in life happen without a single word being spoken. A calm person in the middle of chaos often commands more respect than the loudest voice in the room. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They believed that not every situation deserved a reaction, because every reaction is an investment of your energy, and your energy is one of your most valuable possessions. One of the central ideas in Stoicism is that you should never hand control of your inner peace to someone else. Think about that for a moment. If every delayed reply, every cold attitude, or every disappointing interaction immediately changes your mood, then your emotional state is no longer yours. It belongs to whoever happens to influence you that day. The Stoics argued that real freedom begins when your actions are guided by your principles instead of other people's behavior. That doesn't mean becoming cold or emotionless. It means choosing your responses instead of being controlled by your impulses. This is where silence becomes surprisingly powerful. Most people speak because they feel uncomfortable with uncertainty. They rush to explain themselves, justify every decision, or chase after reassurance the moment they sense distance. But the Stoic approach is different. If you have acted with honesty and integrity, there is no urgent need to force an outcome. You allow events to unfold without constantly trying to control how other people think or feel about you. That quiet confidence is rare because it comes from self-control rather than emotional dependence. Interestingly, people often pay closer attention to those who don't constantly seek attention. Not because silence is a manipulation technique, but because restraint signals emotional stability. When you remain composed instead of reacting to every situation, you communicate that your peace cannot be easily disturbed. Others may not consciously realize why they respect that behavior, but they feel the difference. Calmness has a weight that emotional impulsiveness rarely carries. The real lesson is not that silence makes people chase you. The lesson is that silence protects you from becoming a prisoner of every external event. The Stoics believe that your greatest strength is your ability to govern yourself before attempting to influence anything else. When you master that principle, your attention becomes intentional, your words become more meaningful, and your presence carries a quiet confidence that doesn't need constant recognition to prove its value. 5. Confidence without words. And what if the greatest advantage you could ever have is the one nobody can take away from you? Most people spend years trying to control how they are perceived. They want admiration, approval, recognition, and reassurance from everyone around them. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The moment your confidence depends on another person's opinion, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to whoever has the power to approve or reject you. The Stoics recognized this danger long before modern psychology gave it a name. They believed that anything outside your control is too fragile to build your identity upon. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that the opinions of others are exactly that, opinions. They change with moods, circumstances, and personal biases. One day someone admires you, the next day they criticize you, and often nothing about you has actually changed. The only thing that changed was their perspective. If you allow your self-worth to rise and fall with every outside judgment, you become emotionally unstable without even realizing it. Your attention is constantly pulled outward, searching for evidence that you're enough. This is why people who quietly trust themselves often appear so compelling. They are not walking into a room wondering who will notice them. They walk into the room focused on how they can live according to their own standards. That subtle difference changes everything. Instead of trying to earn respect from every interaction, they carry respect for themselves before the interaction even begins. The Stoics would call this living according to virtue rather than applause. Your character becomes your foundation instead of public opinion. Ironically, this inner confidence creates a form of scarcity that cannot be imitated. Genuine self-assurance is rare because most people are trained to seek constant external validation. They announce every achievement, explain every decision, and defend every criticism because silence feels too risky. But someone who is secure in their values doesn't feel the same pressure. They know that not every misunderstanding requires correction, and not every opinion deserves a response. Their energy is spent building themselves instead of convincing others. Perhaps the most powerful shift you can make is realizing that your attention should first be invested in becoming someone you genuinely respect. That is pure stoicism. When you stop measuring your value by how much attention you receive and start measuring it by the quality of your character, something remarkable happens. You become calmer, more deliberate, and far less dependent on outcomes you cannot control. And without trying to impress anyone, you often leave the strongest impression of all, because quiet confidence rooted in self-mastery is far more memorable than confidence performed for an audience. 6. When scarcity backfires. The greatest mistake you can make is believing that every silence is powerful. It isn't. Sometimes silence reflects wisdom. Other times it reveals fear, pride, or emotional immaturity. The challenge is knowing the difference. This is where many people completely misunderstand the psychology of scarcity. They assume that withdrawing attention automatically increases their value. But if your absence is only a strategy to force someone to react, then you are still emotionally controlled by the very person you're trying to influence. The Stoics would argue that this isn't strength at all, it's dependence wearing a different mask. One of the core teachings of Stoicism is that intention matters more than appearance. Two people can behave in exactly the same way while living from completely different mindsets. One person steps away because they recognize that peace is more valuable than unnecessary conflict. The other disappears hoping someone will become anxious, chase them, or regret losing them. From the outside, those actions may look identical, but internally, they couldn't be more different. One is acting from self-respect, the other is acting from emotional need. This distinction changes everything. If you withdraw your attention only to monitor whether someone notices, your attention never truly left. You're still emotionally invested. You're still waiting, checking, hoping for a specific outcome. In Stoic philosophy, that means you've surrendered your peace to circumstances you cannot control. You've allowed another person's behavior to determine your emotional state, even if you've stopped speaking to them. True freedom isn't creating distance while secretly waiting for validation. It's creating enough inner stability that validation is no longer required. Ironically, people who are genuinely at peace rarely need to announce their absence. They don't disappear to make a point. They simply stop investing energy where it is no longer healthy or meaningful. Their focus naturally shifts toward what they can actually influence, their habits, their character, their purpose, and the quality of their daily actions. That quiet shift is difficult to imitate because it isn't a performance. It's the natural result of someone whose priorities have changed. The real lesson is surprisingly simple. Scarcity only has value when it is a byproduct of self-mastery rather than manipulation. The Stoics believe that your goal should never be controlling another person's emotions. Your goal should be mastering your own. The moment you stop asking, "How can I make them notice me?" and begin asking, "How can I become someone who no longer depends on being noticed?" you cross a line that very few people ever reach, And that is where genuine confidence, lasting peace, and real psychological strength begin. 7. Become hard to replace. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every title you've ever used to describe yourself had disappeared. Your job, your reputation, your relationships, your achievements, even the opinions people hold about you. Who would you be if none of those things existed? It's an uncomfortable question because most people unknowingly build their identity on things that can be taken away. The Stoics believed this was one of the greatest dangers a person could face. If your identity depends on what you possess or how others see you, then your peace will always be temporary. This is why the Stoics placed so much importance on becoming rather than appearing. Epictetus taught that your real wealth is found in your character because character is one of the few things no one can steal from you without your permission. People may copy your style, imitate your words, outperform you in certain areas, or even replace your position. But they can never duplicate the unique combination of discipline, integrity, wisdom, and self-control that you've spent years developing. That is what makes a person truly irreplaceable. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to become unforgettable to others while forgetting to become respectable to themselves. They chase attention, recognition, and admiration, believing these are signs of importance. But attention fades. Trends change, people's interests shift. The Stoics warned against tying your happiness to things that naturally come and go. Instead, they encouraged focusing on what remains constant, your principles, your habits, your decisions, and your ability to act with virtue, even when nobody is watching. This is where the psychology of scarcity reaches its deepest level. The rarest person in any room isn't the loudest, the richest, or even the most charismatic. It's the individual who cannot be manipulated by praise or discouraged by criticism. Someone whose actions are guided by values instead of emotions becomes incredibly difficult to replace because their worth isn't based on circumstances. Their consistency creates trust. Their discipline creates respect. Their calmness creates influence. None of those qualities require demanding attention because they naturally attract it over time. So perhaps the real goal was never to make people miss your attention. Perhaps the goal was to become the kind of person whose absence is felt because your presence was always genuine, measured, and rooted in character. That is the lesson the Stoics left behind. Withdraw your attention when necessary, not as a tactic, but as a reflection of your priorities. Guard your peace because it is finite. Invest your energy where it aligns with your values. And above all, spend your life becoming someone who is difficult to replace, not because you made yourself scarce, but because you made yourself worthy. In the end, Stoicism asks you one question that most people spend their lives avoiding. What truly belongs to you? Not another person's attention, not their approval, not their affection. The only things you can fully claim are your character, your choices, and your response to whatever life places before you. The moment you understand that, scarcity stops being a strategy and becomes a consequence of living with intention. You no longer chase because your purpose is greater than your impulses. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to become valuable in the eyes of others, you begin building something far more powerful, a life that remains valuable even when no one is watching.